In today's podcast.
Yes, it is my place to say something because I can be helpful to someone. I can address something that seems out of sorts within the organization, or even if I don't really know the answer to either one of those, I can just ask a question.
Welcome to the Inclusive Heroes Podcast with your host, Miguel Joey Aviles. Buckle up as we highlight and celebrate leaders who make inclusion happen in their world of work. If you're an HR leader, a DEI practitioner, an ERG champion, recruiter, or ally, this podcast shares the stories of how leaders raise awareness, cultivate courage, and achieve organizational transformation. Join us as we go behind the scenes of true inclusion and belonging. This is the Inclusive Heroes Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inclusive Heroes Podcast. Today, I am thrilled about the conversation that we are about to have. Our topic for today is the art of speaking up. And I have Natasha Miller, the head of diversity and inclusion at Ferrara, with me today. Natasha, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for the conversation too. Thank you for having me.
You know, Natasha and I, we had the opportunity to meet each other at a Society of Human Resources Management event. Back in 2019, we were both featured as inclusion innovators, and we had the opportunity to participate in what was basically for me the last event pre-COVID-19.
Yeah,
can you believe that? My goodness, so much has happened after that event, Natasha, and I'm so happy that we are still connected, still making a difference in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field. Can you please share with our listeners, what is your diversity story? How did you make it to this field? And while you do that, tell us who you are, where you work, and about yourself.
Okay, awesome. Well, first of all, meeting you at that conference, I'm so glad that, we just crossed paths and were able to keep in touch. That was also my last big conference before the pandemic, and I haven't been to anything since then. So I guess as things open up, I'll get a chance to get back out there. But my diversity story, I guess it starts way back in the beginning. And I was thinking about how to talk about this because there's that diversity story that's personal, and then there's that diversity story that's professional and workplace related, but they both just sort of intersect in some way. But if I start, at the beginning, I was always the child that was focused on fairness. And I wanted everything to be fair when I was talking to my parents. And of course, as a young child, I wasn't always the most mature person about it, but I was always asking my mom and my dad, why things weren't fair. And they would give me the types of answers that parents will usually give their kids. But when I grew up, by the time I got to high school, I was a very young high schooler because I started high school at the age of 12. So I started school early and then I skipped a grade. And so this concept of feeling a bit like an outsider, started early for me because I was younger than everyone else. And so there were things that I couldn't do just because of age that other people could do. I couldn't start driver's ed, I wasn't able, my parents didn't allow me to start wearing makeup, which I wanted to wear, and all of these things. And so the feeling of exclusion began at an early age for me. And it kind of settled in for me throughout the years of high school and then even going to college, because I started college and went away to college at the age of 16. And so by the time I entered the workforce as a 20-year-old young woman, I was very mindful of myself and my surroundings and, was I fitting in? Was I doing the right things? I'd started to look around at all times and just wonder, was I doing the right things compared to other people? Because I'd been doing that for the past 8 years. And I got into DEI just as a volunteer, like a lot of people who are now in the full-time diversity space. And the company that I was working for had started some DEI efforts, and I just raised my hand saying that I wanted to, get involved. And after about 10 years of raising my hand to be a volunteer, the organization had fully invested in a DEI officer. And I reached out to the person who was that first DEI officer, and she gave me my first opportunity. I'm forever grateful to her. Her name is Angela Talton. She's a mentor to me today. And that's really my diversity story, just like many of us having feelings of, well, what it means to be an outsider. I'm a Black woman, so I had compounded feelings of being an outsider through the different aspects of intersectionality that are a part of my life.
That is powerful, particularly with the topic that we are talking about, speaking up and having those feelings and a sense of being excluded since our early age shows up as we go in our careers. Can you tell us more about your role at Ferrara? What are you leading? Anything cool that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, so I've been at Ferrara now for just over 2 years. I'm the first person in this role as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're prioritizing a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Our 3 priorities are our people, product, and purpose. And so to just briefly break that down, people is making sure that no one at Ferrara feels like they need to sacrifice authenticity to work at our organization. Product is making sure that we don't market on stereotypes, that we're partnering with diverse suppliers. And then purpose is connecting and with our communities. We are headquartered in Chicago, and so we want to partner right in our backyard and invest in this rich, diverse community that we call home. And so we have, through being so early in our diversity journey, like many organizations getting started, especially getting started in the pandemic, we've invested in internal programs that were necessary to get started in this journey. So business resource groups, a diversity, equity, and inclusion council, while at the same time wanting to hold ourselves accountable as an organization. So we also have public commitments that are on our website because we want all of our stakeholders, including our consumers and our customers, to know about our commitment. And so if you go to the company website right now, you're able to see the commitments that we have made to our people about our products and our purpose as well.
You know, leading diversity, equity, and inclusion in an inaugural role has its own challenges, Natasha. You know, I also served in an inaugural DEI role as the first chief of diversity and inclusion at a military organization. And when we think about having these courageous conversations, having these calling out or calling in or challenging historical systems as diversity and equity and inclusion leaders, we're kind of called to do that. In other words, we're supposed to give a voice to those historically excluded groups. Can we take the conversation to talk about what are some of the steps that we can take to dismantle systems that can serve as a barrier to historically excluded groups? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, this is a conversation that I love to have, and it's a necessary one because it really is the only way that I believe that will really make the progress that we need to make long term. And so when you talk about systemic barriers that exist, systemic barriers exist in a lot of different ways. There are systemic barriers that might exist in our organizational processes, just as one example. And so there may be systemic barriers in our hiring processes, in our advancement and recognition processes. So when you think about like who gets promoted in an organization and how equitable that might be in terms of how the decisions are made, pay decisions in terms like pay equity. And there are public figures out there that just show the gaps in terms of pay equity for white men, white women, women of color, et cetera. This is just public information that's out there. And so what does that look like in your own organization? There may be systemic barriers that exist even around something like accessibility, like just how accessible is your organization for people that might have diverse abilities? Like, are they able to move around can everyone move around your building in the way that they need to get their job done? So there are systemic barriers when you think about it in that regard. And then there may be other systemic barriers that exist that I also believe are a corporate responsibility when you think about an organization's responsibility to serve our communities. And so, there are two sides of this that organizations should be thinking about. At Ferrara, we have started this by prioritizing the internal piece. And we're still in our early stages, but we are diagnosing and assessing those aspects that I just described, like our hiring processes, promotion processes, et cetera. So that's where we are. And it really requires having conversations with people in the organization and bringing everyone to the discussion. So we started a diversity, equity, and inclusion council. That was one way that we were able to bring the right people to the conversation. So we've got approximately 50 people that are in our council. It includes every member of our executive team. So that's our CEO and all of his direct reports. It includes every member of our HR leadership team. And then it also includes members across the organization, across functions, who were handpicked because of their ability to represent their function, because of their value and appreciation for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and their ability to get things done. And that council is now entering its second year for its helping us make these systemic changes.
And thank you for walking our listeners through how complex and the nuances that when we talked about our systems in an organization, there are external, internal, and what I heard is, as you focus on the internal ones, it's basically like looking at the whole talent management system, from recruitment to development, engagement, retirement, promotion, terminations, like the whole thing. But you said something powerful, Natasha, and is this concept of having conversations. Having conversations is kind of a must. And, there are conversations that are simple. It's like literally a back and forth type of conversation. But what we're talking about in these conversations about dismantling historical systems, we may feel kind of a sense of something may not be right. Something is like a mismatch, like this is not right. How do we tackle that? And that's where we take the conversation to the concept of speaking up. And at work, it's critical to hone that skill, the skill of speaking up when it matters, or speaking up when something may not be right. Can you talk about why, from your perspective, is important to speaking up at work?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because with diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly, or even with anything, in the workplace or even outside of the workplace, I think about like experiences that I might have when I'm, in a restaurant, and I might just be a bystander in a restaurant and I'm observing something that doesn't feel right, or doesn't look right, or I've got a perspective or a point of view, and we're all kind of like taking in information and wondering, is this a situation where, I should, intervene with a point of view? And the reason that we created this council is because we wanted to empower and say the answer to that question is yes, because you're in this council. And so we were formalizing empowerment. While we want people to always feel empowered at any time. That's actually one of our company values. We know that people don't always feel empowered. So we wanted to formalize it by saying, as a member of this council, you're actually on a committee, and our council members are assigned to pillars that really like put them in the thick of what's going on with specific areas of the organization. But to get back to your specific question, when it comes to like speaking up, and, I'm going to add like intervention to that. It's so critical when it comes to addressing systemic barriers, because often systemic issues like happen because something is owned by a specific group. And a system is, the actual definition of a system is just a repeated rule or a repeated process. And so something is continuing to happen a certain way again and again. And so whether that's like a way that hiring happens, or like maybe a way that applicants are being reviewed. And I'm just kind of like thinking out loud right now to think about processes that we all understand in the workplace, like the way that applicants are being reviewed. Or if you want to think about like promotion process, the way that promotions are managed in an organization, or the compensation review cycle. Like, so we all know, like within our own organization, like this is the process or this is the system for how it is managed, and it might be managed by a specific department. And the individuals in that department manage that system. And so if it's managed that way again and again, year after year, then the likelihood of like change becomes low, right? Like how can anything really change if you like just have like the same group doing something again and again? And that's why when we, to kind of take it back to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, we intentionally brought a cross-functional group in together, working on these things to actually review processes together and give input. So again, it's that empowerment to say you've got more visibility, access, and exposure to things that are happening. And again, empowerment to kind of weigh in and chime in. When it comes to speaking up on things like outside of even this like formal process, this is a skill that I have had to learn. And I've had to learn it because it may even go back to like just childhood and, maybe even just the way that I was raised, which was a lot of like kind of just mind your own business, or like, if someone's not speaking to me, is it my place to say something if somebody's not speaking to me? So I've had to come out of my shell a little bit to say, well, is it the right thing to do to weigh in or to intervene, even if on the surface it doesn't seem like it's, necessarily my business. And I have found that I am now assessing like internal criteria to say, yes, it is my place to say something because I can be helpful to someone. I can address something that seems out of sorts within the organization, or even if I don't really know the answer to either one of those, I can just ask a question. And sometimes just asking a question, a perfectly timed question, gives someone that may or may not be a victim. I don't even know if they're a victim. I don't know if something is wrong, but my ability to just ask a question can just stop something that's happening to readjust and reframe. So what are your thoughts on that?
I totally get it from my own experience and even culturally, Natasha. Speaking up for me was tough because in the Hispanic culture, we respect authority. And challenging authority is kind of a big no. It's not normal. So it is like a muscle that you have to continuously work. And in that process, Natasha, finding your own voice is kind of an art. So that's why we titled this episode, The Art of Speaking Up. And like any art, and to your powerful point, which is speaking up comes in different flavors.
Yeah.
different styles. Not every style may be loud. Not every style may be confrontational. Your
Yeah.
style may be, our listeners, finding your style is part of the art. And it takes trial and error. It takes effort. It takes mistakes. But what I will say, Natasha, I don't know if you will agree with me, it's uncomfortable. Speaking up, whether you do it in your own style, it feels like something in your stomach. Like, oh my God, if I don't speak up, what will happen? So that's what I think about.
Yeah. And it takes energy. It just takes energy to speak up. And I'm in so many like meetings or rooms or spaces. I'm on boards, so some things are situations that I experience at work, but I'm on about 5 boards right now. So sometimes I'm just like on one of these boards, and I'm on all the boards that I'm on. I have a goal to like get paid to be on a board, but currently every board that I am on, I am a volunteer. So I'm not even getting paid to be on these boards, but I have a point of view, and I'm just like, man, this is like not right. But do I have the energy right now to speak up and like to engage? Like, do I want to engage? But you're right. Like you get that feeling in your stomach, like, but if I don't, I'm not going to feel right. And I don't want any person or anything or any process that needs to be changed to go unchecked. If there's some information within me or even a question within me that could have been raised, that could have improved something. And if I'm occupying a seat, like, why am I here if I'm not going to be useful?
Exactly. And then to your point, Natasha, about having a system or a body of work, in your case, the DE&I Council, that's an ecosystem. It's purposely created to give a voice, to allow people, encourage people, empower people to speak up. And in organizations, it's critical to create those ecosystems that we encourage people to speak up. Another nuance on the art of speaking up is, what about when you are the only one in the room? That is another layer of complexity in the art of speaking up. And I remember, Natasha, being the first civilian chief of DE&I. In many instances, not only I was the only Latino in the room, I was the only millennial. I was the only civilian in a room full of military folk that were like 30 years above my age. So it requires practice, it requires energy management, and it requires the ability to fully understand the appropriate timing, so your speaking up abilities have the impact that you need to have.
Yes, exactly. Because, you want to add value. You want to like speak up because it's the right thing to do. And you want to be like heard. You want it to resonate with the people. So to your point, the art of speaking up isn't just making noise. Like it goes broader than that. And there's relationship management. Like I am managing relationships that are a part of my ecosystem every day, so that when I speak up, that I have an ally in the room. Because like you, I'm an only all the time, at work, whether it's being an only woman. Sometimes I might be an only Black person. I might be an only Black woman. It could be a lot of different things. At a point in time, I was, an only younger person. I've matured in my career, so that doesn't happen as often. But it could be any aspect of intersectionality that is represented. But I am frequently an only of some category. And so through relationship management, I want to make sure that when I speak up, it's heard. And so I'm managing relationships because I might want an ally. And so I may have managed relationships before a meeting, because when I speak up, there's somebody who already knows that I might be speaking up and that person is ready to back it. That's a part of speaking up, is to know, like, who do you have on your side or not? There may be some relationship management that goes into a lot of different aspects of this. And so there's maturity that comes into speaking up so that you aren't just, like I said earlier, making noise.
There is a quotable in what you just said. Speaking up is not just about making noise. And I think we need to let that sit for a minute there, particularly in our field, Natasha. So we have talked about several aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have talked about the DEI councils. You have talked about the strategies, the plan, and looking and evaluating. Can you tell us more about other innovative DEI efforts that you're leading at Ferrara?
Yeah, we talked about the council, which we are incredibly proud of. Something else that I can mention that we're really proud of is, following the events of 2020, we organized healing spaces for our employees. And these were organizationally led. We call them processing spaces at the time, but I think externally healing resonates a bit more. And we brought in people together through small group sessions just to have space with a licensed race and wellness and trauma therapist, just to talk about what was happening. It was completely optional. So no one was forced to the table, but we had terrific attendance. And so they started going into 2020. We continued them throughout 2021. And our employees were able to, through a guided, moderated session, just talk about and process their thoughts and their feelings with each other. We had Chatham House rules, of course, and so people were able to speak freely with each other. And the amount of connection and understanding that deepened through those conversations was just unlike anything that I had ever experienced in my career. Just seeing people who had never met each other because we've been virtual for so long, or some of our employees were already remote employees, not in Chicago, and seeing people just, on Zoom like you and I are right now, so say to each other, I have never met you, but I'll never forget you. Like things like that coming out of those conversations was really powerful. So that's something that was very unique for us that I'm very proud of, that we were able to offer our employees.
That is transformational, Natasha. And 2020 was the year of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We all of a sudden we went to the center stage, and business resource groups, ERGs, affinity groups were a critical component of that. Can you tell us more about BRGs at Ferrara? What is your view on them? Have you used them? Tell us more.
Yeah, so we are so proud of our BRGs. We actually just kind of transitioned from employee resource groups to business resource groups to BRGs in the past year. We have 8 at Ferrara. And the reason that we made that transition to business resource groups is, while they continue to make an incredible impact on company culture and how they bring people together, our groups now have an added focus on business growth. And so one way that happened is each of the groups is aligned to one or more of our brands. And so we just took a look at the demographics, the consumer demographics of the brand, and then the affinity of the resource group, and made some matches that made sense so that they could add value where it was needed from that perspective. And then we partnered them with our marketing and innovation department. So when there was need for focus groups or ideation sessions, as one example, that those business resource groups could be a resource for campaigns, so they could reach out if they needed just input from diverse perspectives. And so the business, we're pretty early in this. It's been less than a year. But for the month of February, so right now during Black History Month, our Black Employee Resource Group and our Now and Later brand have partnered for the campaign that was a part of our Black History Month feature because the Now and Later brand does strongly over-index with Black consumers. And so that campaign is run all month long as a part of a brand activation and an employee activation. And it's just one way that we are bringing brand and business resource groups together.
No, I love how you showed how the maturity of ERGs, BRGs work. You know, in my experience, many organizations start at the affinity group level, and they start there. And then they transition to the employee resource group, which is more intentional, more mission-oriented, more business-oriented. And then now you're transitioning to the business resource group by aligning them to a brand. I believe that's powerful, and particularly as BRGs have a voice and support to engagement, campaigns, etc. Natasha, we have covered all kinds of topics here on the art of speaking up. Is there anything else on the speaking up, on BRG's initiatives that you want to share with our listeners before we close?
Yeah, right now we're actually in the middle of a CEO listening tour with our BRGs. And so our CEO does this every year, right at the beginning of the year, meets with each of the BRGs, gives them an opportunity to talk freely and openly about the things that matter to each of those groups. When that listening tour ends, we create action plans for, there might be overlapping themes across the resource groups, and then there are unique themes that matter to each of those individual groups. And so this is our second year doing it. So we're like right in the middle of it right now, but we're really excited to hear what will come out of the groups from 2022. And so that's something, just one other way of like where we formalize speaking up to let our employees know that we want to hear from them, that their voice matters to our leadership team.
That's a clear example on how we as DEI practitioners or HR leaders can create ecosystems where we allow our employees, our members to provide feedback, speak up, share stories, or even recommendations. And Natasha, that your CEO is taking the time to do so is powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I cannot forget to share with our audience that you are doing a tech talk. Can you please share the topic, when it's coming out? Because you all need to go and watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my TEDx is on challenging systems that attempt to block our success. And so I'll be talking a bit about, systemic issues and, what they mean in our personal and professional lives. So this is a topic that is near and dear to me. And we're recording April 9th. And so as soon as that link is live, I'll be sharing it with you.
Absolutely. So you all please check out the show notes. We will post Natasha's website, her LinkedIn profile, and when we have her tech talk, we will make sure to update the notes. Natasha, to close this episode on the art of speaking up, can you please share with our audience what's your favorite quote and why?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and me, I couldn't just have one. So I've got two, but they're short and simple ones. Okay, so the first one is a Fannie Lou Hamer quote, and Fannie Lou, who was a civil rights activist, was an ancestor. She was my grandmother's cousin, and her quote is, "When I liberate myself, I liberate others." And that is just a quote to me about personal freedom and how your sense of personal freedom can be freeing for other people. And so I have that on my website, and pretty much any presentation that I have, I will share her quote with other people. And then the other one is actually closely tied to it. It's here on my chalkboard, if you can see that, Miguel.
Oh, yes.
It's a Maya Angelou quote, and it says, you are only free when you realize you belong no place, you belong every place. And I love that quote. It's just a reminder to me about, it speaks to me about like fitting in, not trying to fit in, just the reminder that I'm free because, I don't belong any place, but I belong every place.
Thank you so much for helping us closing this episode with such an inspiration. And in the art of speaking up is kind of liberating ourselves, liberating our voice to the benefit of others. So thank you so much for joining the Inclusive Heroes podcast. And to our listeners, thank you. And I hope that you're getting a pearl of wisdom today that you can go and apply immediately to your workplace and to your community. So until the next time, this was your Inclusive Heroes podcast on the art of speaking up.